Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're prying open a massive black box that affects almost every single one of us, how your pay, your bonuses, and your promotions are actually decided. We all like to think our compensation is based on hard, undeniable numbers, right? But as we'll see from researcher Jasmine C. Bowles' fascinating work, there is a massive amount of subjectivity driving those decisions behind closed doors.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The limits of objective pay. 2. The benefits of subjectivity. 3. The threat of broken promises. 4. Bias in office politics. And 5. The CEO pay illusion. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The limits of objective pay. We're going to start by dismantling a really common workplace myth, the idea that corporate compensation is this perfect, formula-driven meritocracy.
Look, if a company relies purely on hard data, like raw sales or strict accounting figures, things go sideways fast. Those metrics are rigid, and they're always backward-looking. When you only reward what can be measured perfectly, people naturally game the system. They start ignoring crucial, unmeasured tasks like mentoring junior staff or building long-term client trust. And that is exactly why managers desperately need the flexibility of subjective judgment to capture everything else you actually bring to the table.
And if you're sitting there thinking your company's the exception to this, get this. According to the research, only 11% of firms use purely external, objective performance standards for pay. 11%! That means pure objectivity is basically a myth. Almost everyone's paycheck involves at least some level of a manager's subjective judgment.
Moving to Section 2, the benefits of subjectivity. Since pure data is flawed, incomplete, and honestly rarely used on its own, let's look at why injecting a human element is actually a huge win for organizations.
I mean, have you ever wondered how a company rewards a brilliant long-term strategy that just hasn't shown up in the quarterly earnings yet? Or how they judge your performance fairly when a sudden, unexpected economic crisis tanks the entire industry's numbers? A rigid spreadsheet just cannot handle that. Which brings us to a really crucial concept: adaptive behavior. This is when you alter your actions to match a company's new priorities when unexpected things happen. If you're locked into a strict, objective contract, changing course means a formal renegotiation, which is a massive, expensive, time-consuming headache. Subjectivity lets managers adjust on the fly, rewarding you for pivoting and adapting when the market shifts.
So a manager's gut feeling can actually filter out that uncontrollable external noise, like a financial crash, that might otherwise completely wreck your bonus. It smooths out those distorted incentives. Plus, it gives your boss the power to actively punish that one coworker who's always trying to exploit loopholes. Ultimately, it allows a manager to look at the whole picture and restore a much-needed sense of fairness to the whole compensation process.
All right, on to Section 3, the threat of broken promises. Because as great as flexibility sounds, relying on a manager's subjective word introduces a truly terrifying risk. What if they just lie?
Economists call this reneging. Picture this. You work your tail off doing all the unmeasured, value-adding tasks your boss asked for. But come review time, your boss opportunistically lowballs your performance just to save the company some cash. Because subjective reviews are totally unverifiable, a court of law can't enforce them. Bosses have a direct financial incentive to go back on their promises. And obviously, once employees catch on to this, motivation absolutely tanks.
So how do companies stop bosses from basically hoarding the cash and destroying trust? They use a few clever mechanisms. First up is reputation. If word gets out that a firm cheats its people, top talent is going to flee. Second, fixed bonus pools. This legally locks in the total payout, so your boss can't save the company money by underrating you. They just have to figure out how to slice the pie. And third, up or out contracts. If you aren't promoted, you're fired. This forces honest ratings, because a boss can't pretend a star player is underperforming just to pay them less without being forced to actually fire them.
Now let's hit Section 4, bias and office politics. Let's see how this subjective system, even when it's guarded against reneging, builds the exact kind of toxic office politics we all hate. Because bosses are human, they are incredibly prone to inaccurate assessments. Why? Well, gathering deep, detailed info on everyone's performance is exhausting and expensive. So they use mental shortcuts like the halo effect, judging you on a general vibe rather than specific metrics. Or they suffer from leniency bias, giving everyone a pretty good score just to avoid an awkward conversation. Throw in some classic favoritism and an unconscious obsession with financial outcomes anyway, and the evaluation gets really biased really fast.
And how do we react to this?
Well, if your bonus depends entirely on your boss's personal opinion of you, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to shape that opinion. This subjective setup basically invites employees to spend their day kissing up, what economists politely call influence activities. People end up curating this perfect, friendly image instead of actually doing the work that brings real value to the company.
Ultimately, this extreme flexibility comes with a massive psychological cost. It breeds uncertainty. When the criteria are just whatever the boss thinks is best, you're left completely in the dark about how to actually earn your bonus. If the link between your sweat and your paycheck is clouded by your manager's mood swings or biases, that fundamental trust you need to stay motivated just completely dissolves.
Finally, Section 5, the CEO pay illusion. What happens when we scale this all the way up? What happens when the employee being subjectively evaluated is actually the most powerful person in the room?
Let's look at this through the lens of managerial power theory. When corporate governance is weak, a CEO basically has de facto control over the very board of directors evaluating them. They can hijack the subjective evaluation process to extract massive payouts, often shifting the weights toward performance metrics they already know they're crushing. It totally flips subjective pay from a tool of fairness into a vehicle for sheer rent extraction.
But here's the catch. They have to be careful. Powerful CEOs can't just write themselves an infinite blank check, because passive shareholders would freak out and their reputation would take a huge hit. Instead, subjectivity acts as a smokescreen. It maintains this neat little illusion of a link between pay and performance. It allows them to pull massive wealth out of the company while hiding behind unquantifiable buzzwords like strategic vision or subjective merit to keep everyone quiet.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. Subjective pay is absolutely crucial to capture the real human value that spreadsheets miss, but it is incredibly vulnerable to bias, office politics, and raw power. So the next time you sit down for a performance review, ask yourself, is this subjective system genuinely rewarding your unmeasured value to the company, or is it just a smokescreen for the realities of power? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.